Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and today I wanted to talk about hybrid picking. I put out a bit of a Q&A on Instagram, and someone said they wanted me to look at hybrid picking and blues as well, which I might do in a later video. And I thought it'd be really interesting to get inside the technique. I haven't done a guitar-specific technique video in a long time, so I think it'd be a nice thing to talk about, especially just a general perspective on technique. Before we get into the lesson, I do want to say that I do have 2 more workshops coming up. This Sunday, I have an English workshop, and next Sunday, I have a Spanish workshop. Both will be on practice techniques and how to build practice schedules or tackle certain things in your practice time and use it effectively. If you want to be a part of that and the community groups, please do shoot me a message on Instagram, shoot me a message on Facebook, or email me. It's a small monthly fee of $12 a month, and I just want this to be as accessible as possible to everyone. So if you're interested, please do just shoot me a message and we'll get you sorted. All right, shameless plug out of the way. Let's actually get to the lesson. So hybrid picking was something I came across kind of when I was around 16-ish. Somewhere around there, and was something I got introduced to by Brett Garcet's playing. And what really struck me about it was the fluidity. And the way I'm going to divide this lesson is as follows. I'm going to talk first about sound and technique, then give you a small exercise, and if we have time at the end, talk a bit about how you can actually use this creatively, or how to use this in a musical fashion and not just shoehorn it into a lick. So I think first we have to get into why I use hybrid picking. And bear in mind, I'm speaking from my perspective on how I use it. If you want to check out, let's say, a bit more of an aggressive version of hybrid picking called chicken picking, that's very particular to country and bluegrass and has kind of its own melodic vocabulary as well. There are great resources for that. But when it comes to hybrid picking, the reason is it struck me when I was first starting guitar that, I have a pick, but why am I not using my fingers? But initially I didn't think too much of it. I just thought that's how it was. And then I saw Brett Garcet playing and using his fingers, and it actually kind of got me thinking back to what I thought about when I was first starting to play. Why not use the fingers as well? Now, one thing I try and impress upon my students is not to think of technique for the sake of technique. Think about the actual sound you want, either a general sound you want to aim for, or what sound the technique will bring to your playing. And the reason I use hybrid picking is actually more in service of my legato. Sorry. To try hide a little bit of the pick attack, because there's an obvious difference. You're not using a material to hit the strings. You're using your fingers, your flesh, and a bit of your nail. Actually, to talk a bit about mechanics, I use mostly the pad of the finger with a little bit of nail, just so I get a little attack. I find if you go either extreme, it doesn't. You get an imbalanced sound. And I found this to be a really cool technique as opposed to just being a purely pick player or a purely fingerstyle player, mostly because I didn't want to get into the nail shaping and nail hardening and that whole process. And I wanted to get into the legato playing and make sure my attacks were smoother, which helped for string crossing. What I didn't realize, and this eventually opened up to me, was that suddenly I was able to get more note separation in my arpeggios. I'm sure it's possible to do that with alternate picking. I found it was easier to achieve that through hybrid picking, and I just enjoyed the sound of it more. Even if I play something like that, or there's a really clear sound across all the notes. Also, it opened up the door for some of the wider intervallic stuff, because I can grab notes that are maybe not close to what I'm playing with my pick, just by using a finger, and not have to use my wrist to move around too much, for example, or set up a movement with my wrist. Because by the time I'm already picking, my finger or my pick's already moved over here. But even if I want to do something like, it's a really useful tool to have, at least for me, and I find it's good for changing directions in the middle of lines as well. Chordally speaking, it's kind of self-explanatory in that you're now able to attack all the notes at the same time, much like a piano player would. So that's a little bit of why I use the sound, or why I opt for a hybrid picking approach. I like the tonal palette it offers. It offers some unique ways of getting around the fretboard or accessing different musical ideas, and it's just better for my left hand technique, at least the sound I'm aiming for in my head, of a very smooth and fluid effect. Now granted, yes, you do have to be able to play staccato when necessary, but that's a different thing altogether. So let's actually get into the technique of it. And I mentioned a little bit about sound and tone production, but usually the main issue people end up having when they start to look at hybrid picking is that they have a hard time getting the fingers moving. So what I would suggest students do is use scales as a vehicle to practice at least getting your fingers in motion. This would be through using basically variations of PIMA exercises. If anyone's familiar with the classical world, exercises for your right hand strength and independence for your finger style. Now, do the same thing, but instead of treating the thumb as P, it's going to be your pick. And what you can do is do some variation or the other of playing a scale just to get the fingers used to being, well, used. So for example, if I take a G major scale, what I can do is alternate between pick and, let's say, middle finger, for example. So now notice I'm not really worried about tone or fluidity yet. I'm just worried about making sure I can use my fingers. Try the same thing with pick and ring finger. You can even try descending, although what I will say is you'll notice I rarely use descending hybrid picking patterns because they're tougher for me to control rhythmically, and I think this is something I've seen across some other people mentioning the same thing, where it's tougher to control the rhythmic movement, and I think that has to do with the way your wrist naturally moves, but that gets into ergonomics. Then you can do the same thing, even if you're really crazy about it. Let's say these three fingers. How about four fingers? This one's going to be really weird because you got to line everything up. Let's say we do a 4-note per string major scale or a 3-octave major scale. Now, would I say that is the most useful exercise? No, but if you want to at least get your pinky moving, it might be a good option. The other thing you can do to start experimenting, once it feels a little more natural with at least your second finger, Try play through scales, and this is more, again, to work with your legato technique, and why I like the hybrid picking approach is that it hides the string cross a little better. It doesn't feel, you don't hear the attack of the pick as clearly as when you're crossing strings. So I would take a major scale, and really try be aware of the rhythm and the rhythmic definition. And try just get the finger moving anytime I'm changing strings. Same thing if I were to do arpeggio shapes, or let's say wider interval shapes. Right? Or and you see I've got kind of a sweep going on the descending pattern. And then you can start coming up with your own lines, and this is where we get into the creative realm. So I would suggest tackling those exercises first and getting your fingers moving, rather than diving right into a musical scenario and kind of being a little frustrated as to why maybe your fingers aren't working. Then start thinking of it in musical situations. Maybe when you're improvising, force yourself to use your fingers every time there's a string cross. It's going to be a little awkward at first, but it'll get your fingers moving. Then next you can start taking chord shapes, much like what I talked about in one of my other lessons, and start playing those up and down. Right? Or let's say I want any chord shape. Right? And this will start opening up some of the wider interval stuff. By the way, if you want an etude for this, I'm going to put the card up here somewhere. I did share one of the etudes from my book. It was etude 6, which was purely a hybrid picking etude. So if you want a musical piece that forces you to work on your hybrid picking, which has an indicated picking pattern, go check out the video, see if you like it. The breakdown is also there, and if you like it, shoot me a message. I'll send you the PDF of the music so that you can follow along. And that'll be a good thing to help get that kind of vertical motion happening. Now, another way you can use hybrid picking is for your intervallic phrases. So let's say anywhere there are fifths involved, or sevenths, or sixths, right? It's a slightly, at least for me, it's a slightly easier way to get some wider intervallic stretches without having to do too much right hand work. Right? So there I had a sixth interval, or one note per string. That's another thing I think hybrid picking is great for, kind of one note per string concepts. Right? Other things you can use hybrid picking for, kind of generating sequences of triads. So let's say, instead of just playing, let's say we have a triad pair idea, you can then use the hybrid picking to kind of juggle the notes around. So in a really musical way. That's a little harder. It's definitely possible, but it's a little harder to do with the alternate picking, I've found, at least for me. Or let's say change the notes around a little more. Like that. Let's say, so we've got this pattern. And then when you put it together. So you can come up with different ideas. In short, just to close out on hybrid picking, the reason I use it is because it's an extremely fluid sound. If you're talking about at least this style of hybrid picking that really requires a very light touch. If we're talking chicken picking, check out guys like Andy Wood. I think Levi Clay also has some videos on it, and a good friend of mine, Kevin Eknes, also covers that really well. And he uses it a fair bit. That has its own language and is more aggressive, but that is part of the sound, and you only get that through using your fingers. But at least this style of hybrid picking is great for hiding attacks a little more, and also getting a more fluid horn-like sound, and when you're playing chords, getting that pianistic quality. So again, just to recap, work on the technique, work on getting your fingers used to actually moving, because if you've never tried it before, it might feel a little awkward at first. Then once you're comfortable, start incorporating it into your lines or your improvisation anytime you have string changes, or let's say maybe one note per string concepts, and eventually start creating your own lines that could use the technique effectively and in a musical sense. So I hope this video lesson's been helpful for you guys. As always, please do subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, share it, comment, and do let me know if you have any other video topics you'd like me to cover. Always interested to see what you guys want to hear about and learn. So take care, and I'll see you in the next video.